Your A's are what people often talk about as triggers. I hate that word, but you guys will probably know it. So that's what we talk about as triggers. I might use the bubbles. I don't know if we'll have time, but at least you know they exist. So let's talk about antecedents a little bit more. So what comes immediately before the behavior? This is not what keeps the behavior happening, but it's what causes the behavior because of a history of contacting what happens at the end or the after condition. So it can be a direction, it can be the presence of a person, an item, an activity, a change in the environment, a change in the setting, a structure of the environment. It can be a whole lot of other things too, but those are some general things. The interesting thing about behavior is that we also, if we have the capability of doing it, and even people who are significantly delayed, change their behavior because of these conditions. So that's why we all behave in certain ways in the presence of a certain person, or in the presence of a certain activity, or in a certain location. That's where the A comes in. So in the presence of my mom, I act a certain way, but in the presence of my husband, I act a different way. That all comes in that antecedent spot. So if you have somebody that's acting inappropriately, you oftentimes will start to find the function with the antecedent. I told him to sit down, and he threw himself on the floor and started screaming. What was the antecedent? The instruction to sit down. What was the behavior? Fell to the floor and screaming. And then what comes after, what happens after, is what will keep that behavior going or stop it. Does that all make sense? It makes what seems like a very complicated thing seem very simple, and for people who haven't contacted these concepts before, it almost seems absurd that that's how things could happen, but it does. This is exactly why behavior happens, and this is exactly how we change behavior. Okay. So let's briefly do this. This is where we could use the bubbles. So the A, B, and C are kind of like the bubbles. Oh, maybe I skipped one. I sure did. Okay, so let's talk about consequence first. So consequence, it's what immediately happens after the behavior. It's an if-then relationship. If I do this, then this happens. If I scream in the grocery store, I get candy. If I throw myself on the floor, I don't have to sit down. What are some other classic ones? When my grandma's there, if I whine and cry, I get candy. If my mom is there and I whine and cry, I don't. So there's three things that are the main consequence. You want to think about consequence a little differently, because in the real world, away from ABA, we talk about consequences as when somebody does something wrong, what's the consequence for that, right? That's not how we're talking about it here. We're talking about it simply as what's happening after some level of behavior, either appropriate or inappropriate, to keep that behavior going. It's just an after thing. So reinforcement. Something causes the behavior to increase. Reinforcement can happen for bad behavior too. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. So we talk about reinforcement and you think of warm fuzzy things, right? But sometimes scolding a kid or punishing a kid, what we think is punishment, right? Spankings or timeout, sometimes that actually can increase a behavior. And that's where functions of behavior come in to try to figure out what's going on with the behavior. And if something increases, it's automatically reinforcement. Automatically, whether we would consider it a warm fuzzy thing or not, it's reinforcement if it increases a behavior. Extinction we're going to talk about later because it's a little more complicated. Punishment. If we do something after a specific behavior and it decreases that behavior, it's automatically punishment. Increase is automatically reinforcement and decrease is automatically punishment. So you kind of have to think outside of our normal disciplinary thoughts as people and as parents potentially, because we use these words in a different way. Okay. The teacher says everyone lines up for recess. The students line up and go to recess. I always start with the behavior. What's the behavior? Line up. Yep. What could we get more specific with that? What's lining up? Standing, walking. Yeah. Yep. What's the antecedent or the before? Teacher tells them to line up. The instruction. What's the consequence? Go to recess. Yep, it's implied. It's not specifically said. So behavior, line up. Antecedent or before, instruction. Consequence, recess. Simple. Johnny's sister comes into his room. Johnny asks her to play. She takes Johnny's truck away from him. So Johnny, you can break things down into two different sides. So in the last one, we could have looked at the teacher's behavior, potentially, if we had a little bit more information. In this one, we can look at both people and what might happen to their behavior. So look at Johnny first. What's his behavior? He asks his sister to play, right? What's the before? Sister comes into the room. The presence of a person. What's the after for him asking him? Truck. You know, even simpler, and this is where the bubbles come in, is truck, ask his sister to play, no truck. So what do you think is going to happen to his behavior of asking his sister to play, potentially? It might decrease. Yep. Pretty good punishment contingency there for him with his sister. Okay, sister. What's his sister's behavior? Takes the truck. We could look at it both ways. We could say she comes into the room. No, we can't. Truck takes the truck is the behavior. What's the before? Asks her to play. You see how the behavior for Johnny became the antecedent for his sister? What's the consequence? She got the truck. So he had a truck, asks his sister, no truck. She doesn't have a truck, takes it away, has a truck. What's going to happen to her behavior? It's all intertwined.
Her behavior was reinforced.
Hers potentially could go up, so it was reinforced, and his potentially could go down.
Could there be a comparable difference from an extrinsic behavior and an intrinsic behavior on how you would manage that?
Well,
From the ABA side as well.
from an ABA perspective, you would want to know who you're intervening on, and then you would, because both of those are different functions, so you would probably intervene on sister, because that sort of is shaping both of their behavior, is what she did. So yeah, you would, but you have to consider the other person in what you would do to intervene, because that person also shaped what happened.
So comparatively, you want to address the more, like I said, whether it be the intrinsic side or the extrinsic, the more, I don't call it dominant, call it the more.
Yeah, we would probably refer to it as the more effective behavior, sure.
Behavior.
The more intrusive behavior, the one that sort of.
Because that'd be the intrinsic thing to me in my mind.
Yeah,
In the
yeah.
situation that I'm thinking about, because that's self-rewarded versus rewarded based on something they get out of it.
Yeah.
Monetary or whatever.
Yeah.
Or someone said, hey, go do this,
Yep.
and I'll do this for you.
But I mean, then the reality is that he did the appropriate thing,
Yes.
and she did the inappropriate thing. So we almost always intervene on the inappropriate thing, right?
Yeah.
But you also have to keep the appropriate behavior going.
That's-
Don't lose it, because if his behavior goes down so much, then he will start also engaging in inappropriate behavior in her presence or in those
And that's
same
kind of where I
conditions.
was thinking.
Yep.
That, you know, that's
Yeah.
that hard balance. to
It
get
is.
Those two, because you got one better than the other, of course. but
Yes.
Then if you've been, you know, if you look at this and you go, wow, bam, then you see him decline.
Yes,
down
exactly.
because of that
exactly.
behavior.
And that's how behavior gets so complicated. I'm trying to simplify it, but the plain situation is that behavior is a very, very complicated thing, especially if there's a long history of the behavior occurring. The longer the history, the harder it is to change, the longer it will take. So, yeah, okay, so behavior function. This is why behavior happens, if you're here for that. Let me check the time, because we have a game to play. We have enough time. Okay, so I need 2 volunteers. And I understand, I am not an audience participation person. This is fun, though. So, not that I would volunteer, but I do know 2 people. 2 people. One person is going to go outside, and one person is going to stay with me.
Wait, what?
The person that stays with me is easy. The person out there is the one that has the most participation.
Buddy time.
Anybody?
Thanks, Tara.
I will pick somebody, and I only know so many people in here, so. Come on, newbie.
I'll do it, yeah.
Okay, I know you know me, so I'm not good. All right, okay.
Yeah, I'll stay in here. You can go out there. You decided to do it first. Go instructions.
Stay out there, don't listen to anything, so you gotta go far away because the kitchen's open. And you can't hear anything, because I have to tell everybody else what's going on too. Plug your ears or something. No cheating, because it'll ruin the whole thing. Okay.
Get her.
She has to be creative enough to try things. Otherwise, they need
That one? I don't want to, I just want to
You're picking up.
Silver lining when you come down. I really know
This is called the shaping game. We are going to try to get her to engage in a certain behavior simply by clapping loudly or softly. This is how fast you can change behavior. Behavior can change fast. We are going to get her to pick up her cup. Okay? So when she comes into the room, she's far away, right? So it's soft. As she comes closer, you get louder and louder. If she goes the opposite direction, you get really soft, right? She gets closer to her cup, you start going really loudly. Okay? She already knows she's supposed to try things. This has been a big dud when people don't try things. So let's hope she follows directions. Everybody good?
That she follows directions.
That's part of the nail.
You did? No. You bought it for it? She did not. But it's cute. Well, it's
Okay, so that's just really fun. Thank you for playing along. You can change behavior very, very fast. And when it comes to things that you don't want or are serious, just know that what you do, or potentially what someone else is doing, is making that behavior continue. So that was very quick. Thank you, that was very good. So just know that because behavior happens for a reason, the reason why is really, really important. And what we do changes whether that behavior continues or doesn't continue. And if it's something that's dangerous or something that we don't want, we've got to figure out why and fix it. But you have to know that what you're doing potentially is part of that. That's hard for some people. I'm not doing anything wrong. That's human nature, right? But it is. And it is human nature to try to intervene. Unfortunately, sometimes the way we intervene is what is causing the behavior. That's just the reality of it. It's not criticism for anyone.
Would you agree that sometimes the behavior is a function of a feeling that they have inside and not something necessarily that can be seen externally?
Behavior is always because of something that's coming externally. However, the feeling that comes inside may have precipitated what happens then outward.
Could the external thing be something in the past that they're remembering and not something going on currently?
Yes, but something in the environment was what would have brought that out. Yes. It would have been something that happened, yeah, to stimulate that.
But it might not be something you would connect to it if it was something from their past. And like in a foster care situation, it was, to use the word trigger, triggering that memory.
Yeah, well, what triggered it though? That's what we would look at. You know, it might not all be thought, you know, and that's where this gets really complicated. And there is a misconception that ABA doesn't account for internal processes. We absolutely do. It's just on a day-to-day basis, it's outward. Because behavior is outward, there's something that's happening. Now, what most likely is what we would look at is the end, the after condition, the consequence part. Because something, when that person, whether it's an internal process or an external process that came before that, what happened afterwards is what's keeping it going. How we dealt with it, how the person dealt with it, or how someone that intervened on it dealt with it.
So does that mean, Beth, that ABA could be helpful for like PTSD or things like that? Like if you heard, let's say a child heard a door shut, I mean, and that's a pretty big trigger.
Yeah, so I would say that yes and no. If there's mental health concerns that are not purely behavioral, then there must be other service providers involved, for sure.
But they could potentially...
They could work together for skills training.
Because I mean, we always
Yep.
hear about ABA for autism, but I'm
Yeah.
guessing that it works
Yeah.
for other...
Oh, well, yeah, so I mean, in general, just so everybody knows, ABA is most well known for autism treatment, but ABA is just a set of concepts and principles around the idea of behavior. And so it was only used for autism, but it's used in a whole lot of other fields too. Like most recently, we've moved into the social justice field. So there's a new journal that we have regarding, we're working with social justice people all over the world for trying to intervene on issues that are concerning for humans, just in general, across the globe. So it's used in multifaceted, but I always tell people, so ABA is not a lone island. And if other people need to be involved in the care of a person, then other people need to be involved in the care of a person. And that team needs to work together, because so many people approach behavior as, I'm dealing with the behavior, you deal